session back into order, seeing as we left off on our sponsorship speech.
Motion.
Representative Bai, say that.
Extend, move to recess for 2 minutes.
Is there a second? All in favor? Assuming unanimous consent, we move to another 2-minute recess. Our recess time has elapsed. Are there motions on the table before we continue debate? Okay, seeing as there are no motions, since we left off with a sponsorship speech, all negation speakers, please raise your placard. Thank you, Representative Bai. You have the floor.
Thank the chair. My name is Senator Bai, spelled B-A-I. I'm at the leisure of all those above me, so just give me an indication when you're ready and I'll begin. And also time myself. There's a lot of controversy around ranked choice voting. The Oscars use it, and it actually took Leonardo DiCaprio 6 runs to finally win his Oscar, though that's not necessarily a bad thing. Ranked choice voting promises a lot of things, but ultimately fails because negation always wins. First, let's talk about my first point, ballot exhaustion. This is a point that Representative Gutierrez hinted at in questioning. Let me further extend on it. An October 19th, 2016 Fairvote article talks about voter exhaustion in the case of ranked choice voting. Here's the thing. The bill promises that people don't have to rank every single person on the ballot, but if they happen to vote for people who aren't frontrunners, their vote might not be counted, because if their candidate doesn't get the majority of votes, then what happens is that they're going to move down the list to see who they rank next, but these people might not rank anyone next at all. So here's the dilemma for a lot of people. Either they rank a ton of people on the ballot and rank people that they don't like, meaning that they're possibly voting for people that they don't even support, or this means that they're voting for smaller candidates and their ballot is just simply exhausted. This is a real issue. A July 26, 2020 ballot 2020 main article states that ballot exhaustion hurts lower income and minority constituents because they have less information, they rank less people, and they're more likely to be disenfranchised. In fact, in the 2018 midterm elections, they found that some counties who use ranked choice voting often see as many as 10% of ballots get exhausted. Representative Nailuri talks a lot about how this bill increases voter turnout, but an increase in voter turnout doesn't matter if those votes aren't going to be counted in the first place. Secondly, she promises that people are going to have to strategically vote and vote for the lesser of two evils now. But with this new system, you're telling people that if they're not going to vote for people, if they're not going to rank for people that they don't even support, there's a chance that their vote might not even count at all. This attacks our less informed constituents by enfranchising them. Fail. But second, let's look at the point of voter turnout itself. Representative Naluri talked about increasing voter turnout. What she failed to mention is that this doesn't actually even happen all of the time. A December 16th, 2016 Cato Institute article states that when runoffs occur, when no candidate has the majority of first preference votes, then we're going to have to implement runoffs and just reduce the number of candidates. But the problem is that people are reluctant to vote. Think about it. And the primaries, there's not that big of a voter turnout because people are just reluctant to vote. It's convenient for them in the presidential election because they just cast one ballot. In odd year elections, there's an 8% drop in voter turnout. At the end of the day, this bill promises a lot of things, but it almost fails on every single one of them. It increases voter turnout, but it disenfranchises all those votes and even more. And secondly, voter turnout doesn't even happen all of the time. Fail. You're muted.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 2 minutes and 56 seconds. Seeing as that was a First Negation speech, all questioners, please raise your placards. Representative Krasinski.
Hi, Mr. Bai. So in our current winner-take-all system, are no ballots wasted whatsoever?
Sure, there's some ballots that are being wasted, but like in this case, it's like it's really bad because I mean we're seeing as many as like 10% of like ballots just like not being used anymore. And also,
Okay.
this bill doesn't promise us that we're not going to use the winner-take-all system anymore.
Right, but let's say that we do switch to ranked choice voting. We do eliminate some of the reasons why these ballots are wasted, right?
Can you explain that?
Sure, so like say that people vote for a candidate that's no longer in the running. Their ballots get wasted in our status quo, right?
Yes, but that's only in the primary elections.
But that's still a huge part of votes that don't go represented, right?
But that's in the that's a completely different election. We're talking about like the actual presidential election here.
Sure, but this happens in all, like, let's say like even in presidential elections, this happens repeatedly. We've seen like hundreds of thousands of votes wasted.
Well, their votes are still being counted. It's just their candidate isn't going to
Questioning
win.
time has elapsed. Are there any other questioners? Representative Krasinski, would you like to have the second questioning go as well?
That's okay, thank you.
Seeing as there are no other questioners, the chair will absorb the remaining 1 minute of questioning time. Seeing as that was a negation speech, all affirmation speakers, please raise your placards. Representative Krasinski, you have the floor.
Thank the chair. Assuming that my judges are ready, I will also be timing myself, PO, if that's perfect. Okay. If all my judges are ready, I will begin. Almost 300 years ago, Benjamin Franklin wrote, "Well done is better than well said." So while this Congress speaks about equality and each person having a voice, we haven't actually done anything. Today, let's affirm to make sure that the voice of every single American is heard. Because first, we affirm because it prevents votes from being wasted after early voting. For the 2020 election, primary voting in Iowa started in February 3rd. However, during the duration of the primaries, dozens of candidates dropped out, but primary ballots went unchanged. The Atlantic explains in 2019 that ranked choice voting solves a dilemma unique to primary campaigns. The Kansas primary, for example, isn't until May 2nd, but when the field of candidates will almost surely be much smaller than it was before. But the filing deadline for candidates is in February, meaning many Democratic contenders who quit the race in the interim will likely still have their names on their ballots. In 2016, more than 700,000 votes were cast in primaries for candidates who had already withdrawn from the race, a wrinkle exacerbated by the rise of early voting. So Mr. Bai is concerned with a few wasted votes, but in his status quo, we're throwing away almost 1 million of them. He assures me this is just in primaries, but even in primaries alone, if we aren't representing 700,000 votes, there is a problem. But this problem can be solved by ranked choice voting, because with RCV, voting for a candidate who drops out is no longer an issue because your vote would count for the next ranked candidate that you have on your ballot. Primaries occur between February and June, and over that time period, the candidate pool can shift significantly. So without RCV, so many votes would go to waste, hindering the democratic process. A little more than 100 years ago, I would not have had the right to vote. I hope you join me in the affirmation to make sure every single fought-for vote counts. But next, we affirm because RCV eliminates a method of voter fraud used by Russians in the 2016 election. Now, Mr. Lurie mentioned the dilemma of voting for a less popular candidate. We must understand that that is exactly one of the ways that Russians manipulated the 2016 election. It was by convincing people to throw away their vote on a candidate who had no chance of winning. The New York Times explains in February of 2018 that a big aspect of Russian meddling was encouraging voting for a candidate who had no chances of winning. In fact, one Russian ad urged progressives to choose peace and vote for the Green Party as the only way to take our country back. The ad declared, "Trust me, it's not a wasted vote." But allowing voters to rank their candidates at least would have defanged one key form of Russian meddling. Now, while there might not be independent primary ballots, when you ask for a party ballot if a third party candidate is still in the race, they often run on the Democratic ballot. This is where Mr. Gutierrez's misconception during questioning with Mr. Naluri comes up, because he seems to hold the false belief that in the status quo, constituents would never vote for one candidate if they supported a different one more. But actually, Representative, in the normal winner-take-all system, voters will sometimes not vote for the candidate they want because they feel their vote is wasted if their candidate loses. So the Russians take advantage of this and promote a candidate falsely to try and draw votes away. Since the candidate has no chance of winning, these votes go to waste. Even if Russian ads convince only a small percentage of people to switch their votes, that can make a big difference. Past elections have shown us the importance of a few single votes. Whether it's 3 or 3 million, every single vote counts. When Benjamin Franklin signed the Constitution, he hoped to bring the best for American people centuries later. As an advocate for the individual American voice, he would want us to vote today to change an outdated system and make sure the voice of every single American constituent is heard. Affirm.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. We will now move on to direct questioning. All questioners, please raise your placards. Representative Lurie.
Hi, Representative. So under ranked choice voting, aren't the people who vote, they're obliged to vote 3 different people, correct?
Yes.
Right. So if you're a lower income constituent and don't have access to a lot of the current politics and you are only informed on one person, wouldn't that make your second and third vote not a knowledgeable one?
Okay, but let's say in the status quo, if you're an uninformed constituent, that makes your main vote unknowledgeable and you don't have any backups.
Right, but if you have a second and third option and you have to fill it out, aren't they going to be filling out less informed votes?
So say like if you go vote, you ask for a Democratic or Republican ballot, right? So at least you have at least a range of which party you're voting for, where you just vote for one, and if it doesn't count, your vote doesn't count whatsoever.
Okay, but let's say you go, right, and you want to vote for one, but you literally have to put down 3 options. What are you going to do?
That's unfortunately a consequence that we're going to have to deal with.
Thank you, Representative. Your questioning block is over. Representative Bai.
How does this bill protect wasted votes in the primaries if it completely gets rid of the primaries altogether?
So this bill doesn't get rid of the primaries. In fact, in section 1 of this legislation, so essentially, even if we are not having primary votes under ranked choice voting, we are still seeing an influence of a lot more candidates being able to be put on the presidential ballot, right?
Okay, but what's the impact of that if I already told you that candidates that most Americans don't like are still going to be voted simply because ballot exhaustion exists?
Ballot exhaustion exists, but can be greatly minimized under today's legislation.
But today's legislation doesn't do anything about ballot exhaustion.
But Representative, it's still like if we have more people voting for a large list of people. So if the first vote is exhausted, there are still 2 people that the bill can fall back on.
But I told you minority groups and also lower income constituents don't necessarily rank that many people. So they're going to be disenfranchised by the system.
They're disenfranchised by the system.
The questioning time has elapsed. So seeing as that was an affirmation speech, all negation speakers, please raise your placards. Any and all negation speakers, please raise your placards. The chair highly frowns upon a one-sided debate. Any and all affirmation speakers, please raise your placards. Representative Lurie?
Motion for a 1-minute recess to talk about.
Second? All in favor? Assuming assuming majority, we will now move on to a 1-minute recess.
I'm almost done with my speech. I'm almost finished writing down my second point and my conclusion. So maybe I might need like another 1-minute recess after this, but after that I should be good.
Wait, so we already skipped the next cycle. Like we've already moved on. We did an aff speech right now. We just had 4 affirmation speakers. Do we not have any?
Yeah, I can go.
Why didn't you raise your placard then?
Oh, I thought we were still on the next cycle.
Okay, so we do have an F speech, and then by the
Oh.
time his
By the
cycle is
time-
over, Mr. Gutierrez, will your speech be ready?
Yes.
Perfect. Motion?
Yes, Representative Krasinski.
Motion to adjourn the recess.
Is there a second? All four? Assuming unanimous consent, we adjourn recess. Since we have skipped over the negative speech because there are no negative speakers prepared, are there any affirmation speakers? Representative Lurie, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. This is Representative Lurie, spelled A-T-L-U-R-I. Again, that's A-T-L-U-R-I. I believe my judges said they're ready, so I'll start in about 5 seconds or so. In the 18th century, US elections were founded on the basis of our democracy. But now, in the 21st century, the election system goes against this nation's fundamental policies. Policies where our constituents' voices will actually be heard. Let's finally stand for a just democratic system and pass today's legislation. Now, first, you pass because this bill better represents our constituents' ideals when voting. Representative Lurie on my side argues for an increase in voter turnout. Now, that's absolutely right. But that impact only comes into fruition if those increased amount of people vote for a candidate that is in contention to win. Otherwise, that vote is wasted. Today's legislation concentrates the votes on the top candidates. Fairview in 2018 explains that in the final round, more than 96% of ranked choice voters received 40% or more of the first round vote, compared to the vote in the status quo. 27% of statewide runoff winners achieved only 40% of the first round vote. RCV eliminates the last candidate if no majority is reached. Thus, what we're going to see is the votes will be centralized on the top candidates that win, not votes that will be thrown in the garbage by the end of the day. Now, Representative Bai champions the argument that lower income constituents will have more ballot exhaustion. Two responses to that. One, in either the affirmative or negative world, if a constituent isn't informed, it's likely that they won't vote in the first place. But two, even if they do, the first rank is the ranked choice voting, meaning you still have a first spot that counts more than anything else. So even if they do put random choices for 2 and 3, the first spot is going to count the most. In questioning, Representative Kurzunski shows her worriedness that ranked choice voting won't be feasible during mail-in voting. But Representative, we already have systems in places like Maine and Minnesota. Distributing that equipment won't be the problem. Don't let the voices of the minority overshadow the voices of the majority. Pass and let their vote be heard. But secondly, what no one has talked about, this bill will be significantly cheaper than the current 2-round process. What we see today is that in most US elections, voters have to choose twice, once during a party primary and second in the final election of that primary or municipal election. This 2-round system is more expensive because it's adding another process. In fact, New York Times, October 15, 2019 explains that ranked choice voting saves time and money by avoiding costly low turnout runoff elections, which tend to be dominated by a smaller and unrepresented slice of the electorate. Representative Bai, the status quo is even worse because the second time they vote, white voters are more likely to come back because they have the free time to go to their voting place and vote more. In fact, Minneapolis City Council explains that the cost for RCV in 2013 was just over $97,000. To put that into perspective, a 2-round process costs only $108,000 per round. Let's finally make democratic system better.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Please do not abuse this grace period in the future. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, we will now move on to direct questioning. All direct questioners, please raise your placards. Representative Bai.
Okay, so what happens in a ranked choice voting system where no candidate gets the majority of votes?
Right. So when they don't get the majority of votes, what happens is you'll eliminate the last vote, the last candidate in last place, and then the votes will be redistributed to the top, which why more votes will actually matter.
Okay, but in the piece of legislation, runoff elections have to occur. If that still doesn't happen.
Right. No, it's still going to happen. But what we're going to see is if you cut off the last candidate, that vote won't be wasted anymore because that vote will be going towards higher candidates that are more likely to win.
Also, additionally, in my point, I was not talking about how they're going to be forced to rank the top 3. Even if they rank the top first one, that's fine. But I said that what happens when lower income constituents are voting is that they rank less people and they're more likely to be disenfranchised. So how does your point, how rebuttal still stand?
No, because the same thing, right? Like, even if you're not informed about
Thank
the
you,
second and
Representative.
third,
Your
the
questioning
first-
time has elapsed. Representative Krasinski.
So I agree with you that ranked choice voting is the better option for our voting system, right? But let's talk about Section 4, in which this bill goes into passage immediately. So we do have a presidential election coming up quite quickly, right?
Right.
And in rebuttal to my point, you cited an example like Maine. So how many states in the US currently have a ranked choice voting system?
I believe it's like 8 to 10 states.
Sure, so it's definitely not all 50, right?
Right.
So on this short of a timeline, with funding taken away from the UPS Postal Service, is this actually a feasible solution?
Right. So what we're seeing is Maine, it's not, they don't have the resources like states like New York and Chicago, but they were still able to implement it. So
Okay,
if
but
you look at examples like that.
this was prior to the threat of cutting funding to the Postal Service, right? Are they still going to have all these resources now?
Well, they don't have any funds in the first place, right? So like even if they cut it, they still have the next necessary infrastructure. That's why states like New York, Chicago, they'll have more funding and they'll be able to carry out the ranked choice voting.
Thank you, Representative. Your questioning time has elapsed. All speakers may be muted at this time. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, any and all negation speakers, please raise your placards. Representative Gutierrez.
I thank the chair, and for the judges and everyone else in the chamber, that's Gutierrez, G as in golf, UTIERREZ, speaking of a negation of this legislation. Just let me know when you're ready. All right, cool. Also, is it okay if I time myself? All right, perfect, thank you. This chamber seems to be falling fast asleep, choosing to ignore the multitude of problems that arise within a ranked choice voting system. I'd recommend some plain coffee, because it's finally time that we wake up and realize the bitter taste that this legislation will leave in Americans' mouths. So fundamentally, you fail. But first, you fail today because you're actually going to increase bipartisanship that currently goes on with the status quo. Senator Naluri said in today's debate that you mitigate the spoiler effect because how people don't have to risk one of their preferred candidates losing as a result of voting for a third party candidate that they support more. But in reality, what you're actually going to end up doing is causing further two-party domination and encouraging the duopoly that currently exists. Senator Naluri and I both agree that third parties will become more dominant, but that's about it. But that's exactly the problem too. Voting for them takes away votes from a second choice candidate who can get eliminated first. And as such, we get stuck in the same loop where people are pressured to vote for their second choice candidates, even though it might not be their favorite candidate, they have to vote, they're more pressured to vote for ones that are more likely to win as a result. But in fact, if you don't believe me, let's just look at the status quo to see where exactly this has been going on. James Madison University reported on June 9th of 2020. But if we look at the status quo, in Ireland, Australia, and Malta, ranked choice voting has actually caused a duopoly in government for that exact reason. In fact, in Ireland, since they've had ranked choice voting since their inception, and as a result, their political system is dominated by two main parties, and that keeps going on, and it's kept going on as a result of ranked choice voting. The exact system that Senator Krasinski advertises is actually going to allow people to vote for third parties because they no longer feel pressured. But that creates the exact problem that you're seeing in the status quo. The only problem is it gets so much worse. But next, you fail because you're actually going to disenfranchise a central group of American politics, literally. Because you're going to see moderate factions keep falling behind to more radical candidates. Senator Naluri tells you that you increase voter turnout as a result, as a result of RCV. But increasing voter turnout means a lot less if moderates keep on being disenfranchised. As the California State University report by Madeline Henry reports in 2018, moderates are actually more likely to gain middle-of-the-road support, but they're less likely to be ranked first under ranked choice voting, which means that candidates near the center will be consistently eliminated. You'll see infighting between moderate factions clearing the way for radical candidates to win. But as the Heritage Foundation reports on August 23rd, 2019, by Hans von Spakovsky, this actually happened in the Burlington, Vermont mayoral election in 2009, causing them to eliminate ranked choice voting completely. But here's the impact of that. Gallup reports in 2017 that 39% of the voting population identifies as moderates. You're fundamentally cutting them out of the political system under today's legislation. I believe in giving a voice to the unheard, but it's time for us to wake up because this legislation is the worst way to do so. Fail.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 3 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards. Representative Mallory.
Hi, Representative Miller.
So how can you explain to me how the fact that ranked choice voting is allowing people to vote for third parties, how is that creating a more polarized system?
Because we end up getting stuck in the same loop, because what's going to happen is third party.
But at least in this system, there's the possibility.
Third party candidates will be taking away votes from more popular but candidates that people agree with less.
Okay, but if those third party candidates were taking away votes, if they weren't in the majority, then their second choices would just end up going to the majority candidates anyway. The only difference is that they're more represented under ranked choice voting.
Not true. You're going to actually see that taking away votes becomes even worse.
Okay, under what assumption? That people don't have a second choice?
Exactly. People will be more pressured to vote for other candidates that are more popular instead of candidates that they agree with. You're just ending up.
But what percentage of voters actually don't put a second choice on their ballot?
Thank you, Representative. Your questioning time has elapsed. Representative Alluri.
Hi, Representative. Isn't it a good thing that under ranked choice voting we allow independents and third parties to at least have a chance to win?
You're not going to allow them to have a chance to win, and that's my entire point. Because you're actually going to end up pressuring people to vote for more.
Okay, let me give you a hypothetical scenario. Let's say there's 5 candidates, right? Under ranked choice voting, how much does your vote count for?
I mean, your vote keeps dropping down depending on if candidates.
Right, so it's 3 out of 5, right? Technically, it's 3 out of 5.
No, definitely not. Your first choice, if they get eliminated, that's when it keeps going down and down the cycle. And in fact,
okay, but isn't it better than the status quo where they only have 1 vote?
If you're voting for third-party candidates that are less likely to win, you're going to end up keep having that vote go down and down, as Representative Bai said, and that's another problem.
Right, but isn't it better than the status quo where only one of your
it's actually going to get significantly worse.
How? How is it going to get worse?
Because people are even more pressured to vote for candidates that are more agreeable, but they agree with less as a result.
Thank you, Representative. Your questioning time has elapsed.
I thank the chair.
Seeing as that was his speech in the negation, any and all affirmation speakers, please raise your placards. Any and all. Representative Anderson?
Point of privilege.
State that.
To address the chamber. Oh, for the judges, something just came up, so I have to leave, if that's okay. Okay, thank you. Thanks for judging.
Point of personal privilege.
State it.
Can I leave the chamber to get a charger?
Granted.
Thanks.
So just a little congressional how to phrase things. It's motion, and then I say granted, and then rise to a point of personal privilege. State that, say it, and then I grant it to you again. Judge, you're saying that that's not the proper procedure?
Yeah, you just say point of personal privilege, as far as I remember from NSDA rules.
Mm-hmm.
But it's your chamber.
Oh wait, because we're in online, you don't have to, okay, sorry. I do apologize. So seeing as we have no other speakers for this bill, I will unilaterally move to previous question. So Representative Mallory, you have a 1 minute and 30-second final appeal whenever you're ready.
Okay, for the judges, that's Representative Mallory. I'm assuming everyone was told last time. Okay. We as a Congress are here today as representatives of our constituents. But with our current voting system, this representation is lost. Let us analyze the key points of today's debate and see why it ultimately falls to the affirmation. First, I'd like to address a point championed by Representative Bai and Representative Gutierrez, ballot exhaustion, that people's votes are essentially discarded when they vote for a candidate that isn't in the lead under ranked choice voting. But Representative Kerensky brings up an insightful counterpoint. This isn't any different than what happens in the status quo. Let's go back to the 2000 election, when Ralph Nader and Al Gore had similar stances and therefore their votes were divided because of the spoiler effect. In plurality voting, every candidate that voted for Ralph Nader that would have preferred Al Gore essentially ended up having their vote discarded because George Bush ended up winning. With ranked choice voting, that wouldn't have been the case, because those voters would have at least had the chance to put Al Gore as their second choice, and Al Gore would have been much more likely at winning. The major misconception by the negation today is that people don't put a second choice in their ranked choice voting ballot, which is completely false, given that most people avoid voting in the first place, knowing that their favorite candidate won't win. Representative Bai also brings up the point that many minority groups are disenfranchised by ranked choice voting, but this is categorically false, seeing that a study by Sarah John in 2018 found that after the adoption of ranked choice voting in certain cities, the diversity in candidate pools increased significantly. Let us bring back representation in politics with ranked choice voting. Affirm.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 1 minute and 35 seconds. In the future, I did let you finish your sentence, but try to wrap it up at 1 minute and 30 seconds. Seeing as that was a final appeal, there is no questioning. We'll move on to our negative final appeal. You have the floor, Representative Bai.
On point of personal privilege.
State that.
To re-enter the chamber.
Granted. Again, just a clarification on that. NSTA motions says rise to point of personal privilege, and then so that's your motion, and then granted, and but that's fine. Just in the future, try to remember that. So, Representative Bai, you have the floor whenever.
Let's look at 3 key points. First, voter turnout. Representative Nailuri stated in her speech that voter turnout increases by 10% whenever counties are using ranked choice voting. But in my speech and in other speeches by negation senators, I proved that ballot exhaustion also increases by 10%. This argument is completely nullified. Don't vote for a false promise. Now the second impact, strategic voting. Representative Nailuri in her authorship also championed the impact that ranked choice voting decreases strategic voting and decreases polarization. But Representative Gutierrez brings up a really good counterpoint, that this actually just increases polarization. Strategic voting still happens when there is ranked choice voting. It's just that it's not bipartisanship anymore, it's multi-partisanship. And the affirmation, we have increased political polarization, but in negation, we have an imperfect but far better system. The third point, wasted ballots. Senator Korsgansky states that this bill protects primary ballots. That argument is no, because primaries don't exist anymore if you pass this bill. But second, Senator Atleri says that these votes will just be counted. If the first choice candidate doesn't win, they'll just go down the ballot. However, in my speech, I specifically said that minorities and lower income people rank less candidates, meaning that ballot counters are going to go down the list only to find no one. Their votes aren't going to be counted. Stand for the votes of minorities and stand for the negation.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 1 minute and 25 seconds. Seeing as that was our final appeal, we'll now move on to voting procedures. All of those in favor of passing this bill, please raise your placards. 3. All those against passing this bill, please raise your placards. 2. Any and all abstentions? There should be none. On a vote of 3-2, this bill does pass. Congratulations to the sponsor. Are there any motions? Representative Gutierrez.
Seeing a natural break in debate, I move to a 5-minute recess.
Is there a second? Assuming unanimous consent, we now move to a 5-minute recess. Please be back here by 5:03 Eastern Standard Times. So 4:03 Central. Thank you.
Can we get a split for this next piece of legislation and ensure that we have a sponsor?
Yeah, I'm the sponsor.
Yeah,
Okay,
and then Representative Nailuri was the first negation.
Okay, perfect. And then past that, I believe we have 3 more people. Do we have like 2 AFs, 1 neg, or 2 negs, 1 AF?
I have enough.
Okay.
I have a neg.
At Lurie? I guess it doesn't really matter, but.
Yeah, and then Anderson had to leave.
As AF.
AF?
That's-
Okay, that's
F
perfect.
neg F, perfect.
like just as a note, right, guys, like this is sort of like, I don't want to like beat a dead horse, right? But this is like an invite only. You guys are supposed to be like really good. And I know you guys are really good because I've seen you at like so many other tournaments, right? I've competed with you. I've probably judged you guys. I think I've PO'd a lot of you guys. Like, just try to like, I guess all I want to say is that like tomorrow I'll probably be there and I want to see you guys be better prepped, right? Like we should not have a lack of a sponsor, have to take a recess and then take another one, right? So like, I don't want to be like really, I'll just say it. Like, I don't want to be super like a jerk about it, but like, this is like the highest level of Congress. I know what you guys can do and I want to see you guys show me that, all right? So I'll see you guys in a bit.
Damn, he obliterated y'all.
Also, for the next session, if you guys are still here, it's not a big deal. For like leaving the chamber, if you just PM me, I can grant it to you instead of like having to go through the whole process.
Wait, presiding officer, I think it's best if like they just use the chat function, but everyone can see, so like everyone kind of knows.
Mine as well.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
And also make sure only between speeches. Too.
The question, how much time do we have left into recess?
3 minutes.
All right, awesome, thank you.
Representatives, our recess time has elapsed. Please turn your cameras all back on. Are the judges back?
I've been here knitting.
Okay, so everyone is in chamber. We can now move on to debate on private prisons. Is there a sponsorship? Representative Gutierrez?
Hi, everyone. Once again, that's Representative Gutierrez, Gutierrez, speaking for a second time this session. Just let me know whenever you're ready. Also, is it okay if I time myself once again? All right, perfect. All right. Today, I'm supposed to be playing the role of a congressman, but in reality, I'm just a 14-year-old boy named William Gutierrez, whose cousin is stuck in the reign of terror but has private prisons in the United States. He's subject to not only poor living standards, but also being overworked and abused. This is more than just another story. This is his story, and unfortunately, America's as well. But we can change that story, and it starts today by passing my legislation. So first, allow me to explain the problem in the status quo and why exactly it's so bad. Tara Joy for the Justice Policy Institute on February 2nd of 2018 writes that private prison employees actually earn an average of $5,000 less than public counterparts and receive 58 fewer hours of training. So as we can already see, in the status quo, private prisons are considered inadequate compared to public counterparts. However, that underpaying causes dangerous conditions because workers don't seem to care as much. In fact, a 2016 Department of Justice report explains exactly how bad this has gotten. Private prisons had a 28% higher rate of inmate-on-inmate assault than the public prisons. And in fact, these same private prison companies go to horrifying lengths to maintain their profits. That same report by the Department of Justice found that private prisons regularly failed to ensure prisoners got basic amenities like medical care. In fact, some prisoners went as long as 1 entire year without seeing their doctor. If private prisons can't even maintain the security and health of their prisoners, that's where I draw the line. Sure, they broke the law, but that doesn't mean that they should be subject to such abhorrent and terrible conditions as they are in the status quo. So that's why I ask you to stand with me and pass. But let me explain how exactly my bill solves this problem. Because Section 1 states that all private prison contracts are terminated and private prison facilities will be converted to public prisons. And that's where the main problem lies. It's the contracts. When the government is signing out these private companies to go ahead and manage private prisons, that's where the problem lies. Their goal is to make a profit. Their goal is to not rehabilitate. Their goal is not to help out prisoners. Their goal is to make a profit. And you'll keep seeing that. But if you pass today's legislation, you're actually going to see much more humane conditions as a result. In fact, as Kalina Tomhab reports for the American Prospect on June 25th of 2019, by banning private prisons, you take this first step towards putting an end to the constant abuses ending up in the system. You're going to see a lower rate of assaults among inmate to inmate and inmate to guards. You'll see a lower
Representative, you have passed the grace period. Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 15 seconds.
Point of order. At that point, I timed 2 minutes and 45 seconds in.
Okay. I do apologize. My timer must have done something, but I timed 3:15.
Point of personal privilege.
State that.
PO. I was using Google's stopwatch timer, and I started
Okay.
immediately after I said my first word.
Then I believe that might have been my phone's issue. I'm sorry. If it is okay with the judges, could the representative continue for the last 15 seconds of his speech?
There wasn't a point of order. For the point of personal privilege to address the judges, there wasn't a lot left of my speech, so.
I think it's fine. I don't really think you need to continue. It's up to the other judge, I guess.
I would say that's fine in general. You can pretty much like finish it up quickly, seeing that like, you know, it is like the few last seconds. Just want to say, because it has been bothering me a little, but like point of personal privilege isn't really meant to like address the chamber or address the judges. It's mostly like resort towards exiting chamber or entering the chamber, because there really isn't a motion or like a privilege to address the chamber per se.
Yeah, to address the chamber, you have to call a motion for a 30-second in-house recess. Like that's the appropriate way to do it. But I guess this, I mean, it's
I don't know. Yeah. Y'all are being great and cute, I guess. I don't know. You do you.
Okay. So would the pro temp make a decision on this matter? My phone timer must have overtimed Representative Gutierrez's speech because it might have like glitched or something. But
so typically what would happen here for, I guess, most tournaments would be we would just give the we would give the PO the timer, because like technically you're not really even supposed to time yourself. Like this is just for like your own reference and your ease. So like if you are timing yourself and your timer reads something different, like for most tournaments, we would probably just say like that, like the PO's judge or like timer is final. But I think just for this, like you can just get in your last few words and then we'll just like move on.
Okay.
So I would like to just clarify a little bit. I'll let Representative Gutierrez give his like conclusion sentence, and then we'll time him at 3 minutes.
Yep.
That'll
And, yeah, and I guess for further, like for future reference, just continue with what the PO timer says, and just use your own personal timer as a reference and such, but resort to whatever the PO rules out.
Yeah, and also the presiding officer was giving time signals and they were right. So, I mean, the time signals are there for you to follow the PO's time signals. So in this instance, I do agree with the pro temp's decision, but since there was a little bit of a misunderstanding, feel free to give your last sentence.
Okay. I'll begin the time whenever you're ready.
By banning private prisons, you'll take the first step towards putting an end to constant abuses in the status quo. It's time for this Congress to finally realize that you might be able to save money, but the one thing that you can't place a price on is humanity. And as such, you fail.
Thank you, Representative, for that beautiful conclusion sentence. Because that was our sponsorship speech, we're now in line for direct questioning. All direct questioners, please raise your placards. Representative Naluri.
Hi, Representative. So what's the reason there are so many prisoners and these private prisons are able to profit in the first place?
I mean, the reason that there's so many prisoners is because of the contracts which have quotas, and as such, the pressure is being put on.
Is it because of mass incarceration?
Yes, mass incarceration.
So why don't we
Like
address the root of mass incarceration instead of wasting resources and money into trying to reallocate all of these private prisons?
Mass incarceration is the quotas that are being put inside of contracts for private prison corporations.
Okay, but wouldn't it be much more effective just getting rid of mandatory minimums in the first place, getting rid of the main driver of mass incarceration?
They're not mutually exclusive. What I'm saying is that the main problem in the status quo is those quotas and it's private prison contracts. And if we get rid of those, that we can take that step as well. I'd support that. But today's legislation is about private prisons, and if we ban private prisons, that will be a great first step.
Okay, but my issue is that we're wasting resources and money when the solution—
You're not wasting resources. This is already up. We might as well just debate it.
Thank you, Representative. Your questioning time has lapsed. Are there any other questioners? Representative Mallory, would you like to continue your questioning?
No, thank you.
Once again, calling for any other questioners? Seeing no other questioners, the chair will absorb the remaining 1 minute of questioning block time. Seeing our speech was a sponsorship, we are now in line for a negation. All negation speakers, please raise your placards. Representative Mallory.
Okay. Once again, for the judges, that is Naluri. Please give me any indication when you're ready. Okay. There are some things in our society that can never be seen as business opportunities, and mass incarceration is one of them. Today's legislation comes from a place of good intentions in trying to reduce this issue, but it has no tangible impact on our prison population as it does not address the root of it. Mandatory minimums are the reason why private and for-profit prisons can operate today, which is why we must focus on the source of this problem and stand in the negation of today's legislation because 1, mandatory minimums lead to mass incarceration, and 2, because private companies will still have power under this legislation. Now, mandatory minimums force judges to harshly punish those who pose the least physical danger to communities. Take the case of John Horner, a 46-year-old fast food restaurant worker, as an example. According to Connor Friederscherf of The Atlantic in April of 2013, when John lost his eye in an accident, he was prescribed painkillers. Years after the incident, he befriended a guy who seemed to be in pain himself, so when the friend asked John for his pills, John agreed. This was John's first ever drug offense, but it led him to 25 years in prison. Now keep in mind, it costs $19,000 to incarcerate an inmate for a year, a grand total of $475,000 to keep John behind bars. The excessively harsh sentences posed by mandatory minimums are keeping nonviolent criminals in prison for way too long. We have to understand that the reason these private prisons can profit so much is because of the corruption in our justice system. Excessively high mandatory minimum sentences that lead to mass incarceration. It is simply inefficient for us to waste resources in removing private prisons when that isn't the issue. What Representative Gutierrez fails to understand is that today's issue can be solved by one bill that does not require reallocating all of these private prisons and wasting a bunch of resources and time and money trying to convert them into public prisons. But second, pass today's legislation, because even if we take the affirmation at its highest ground today, banning private prisons will not get rid of private company involvement in our prison system in enough time. As Mia Armstrong of the Marshall Project explains in September of 2019, even though public prisons are technically run by the government, they outsource all of their services to private companies excessively. The issue with this is that these private companies do everything they can to cut costs, resulting in poor quality products and horrible prison conditions. As an example, Tim Requarth of The Nation reported in April of 2019 about the food quality at a public prison in Michigan. Their meals were almost always served late, the kitchen would frequently run out of food, and spoiled food was being delivered to serve at these prison kitchens. By passing today's legislation, all we are doing is wasting our time, our money, and our resources. These public prisons rely so heavily on these private companies, it just simply doesn't make sense for us to try and find all of these replacements for these private companies that are involved in these public prisons, when instead we can remove mass incarceration overall by addressing the root issue of mandatory minimums. Negate.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 1 second. We're now in line for direct questioning. All questioners, please raise your placards. Representative Gutierrez.
Hi, Representative. So in the status quo, what's the biggest thing that you'll find in private prison contracts?
I'm assuming you're asking about the fact that private prisons charge based on how many inmates they house?
Exactly, quotas that are found in over 2/3 of all private prison contracts. So won't private companies try and pressure police to make more arrests as a result?
Okay, let me explain to you one thing that I failed to mention in my speech, which was that prisoners are actually more satisfied living in private prisons than in public prisons. So I don't really see it as an issue.
True. We're
Okay,
literally
if you
being held
look at,
without basic stuff like medical care.
okay, well, prisoners in private prisons file way less complaints than those in public prisons, and given
Senator,
that,
that's definitely not true. In fact, if that would have happened, then all of this information leaked about private prisons wouldn't have gotten out.
okay, well, a report from the government did cite that there was like 70% more.
I also cited a report from the government that stated that prisoners were being held without basic medical care and other amenities.
I think the report that you're referring to.
Representative, your questioning time has elapsed. Representative Utlury.
Hi, Representative. So in general, do private prisons or public prisons spend more for faculty?
Private prisons, I'm assuming?
No, it's actually public. The thing with private prisons is they're lacking, as Representative Gutierrez said, they're lacking faculty, they're lacking reform officers.
Okay,
Isn't that
but
bad?
you have to understand that public prisons, on paper, they may look like they are run by the government, but they outsource all of their services to private companies. The only difference is one says they're privately run, the other one is publicly run, but they have all these private companies.
Okay, but it doesn't matter, right? Because the thing is, private prisons don't have the lack of medical faculty like reform officers. If they aren't actually getting reformed, then there is nothing that private prisons actually offer.
Okay, well, my main point in today's debate has not been that private prisons are a very good thing. My main point is that the reason these prisons can operate is because of mandatory minimums. So why not just give
Right, but aren't they incentivizing minimums?
Representative, your questioning time has elapsed. Seeing as that was a speech of negation, any and all affirmation speakers, please raise your placards. Representative Bai.
I thank the chair. My name is Representative Bai, and I'll just begin. For decades, we have allowed private prisons to put profits over rehabilitation, profits over justice, and profits over people. It's time to stop this Congress's inaction by voting in the affirmation. First, stand with me and affirm because this bill reduces recidivism. A June 2016 ITPI meta-analysis on how private prisons increase recidivism cited violence as a major point. Violence increases recidivism. A study of 20,000 Florida prisoners released in a 2-year time period stated that 54% of prisoners who turned violent during their sentencing times were surveyed, compared to 42% of nonviolent prisoners. Normalized violence in prisons affects the mental health of prisoners and makes it harder for them to reconnect to society. That's exactly what we see in private prisons. An August 2016 US Department of Justice report states that private prisons are driven by the need for profit, so they cut costs on things such as employee training, staffing, and also prison maintenance. In the police bureau storing convicted criminals, that means increased violence. Inmate and inmate assaults are 28% more common in private prisons compared to public prisons, and inmate on employee assaults are 2 times more common. Violence damages the prisoner's mental health, and whenever the federal government uses a private prison, they see recidivism rates increase by 20%. Representative Nailuri said in question that prisoners prefer private prisons. How could they prefer this? The root of the problem starts when private prisons see prisoners as dollar signs. Cutting costs does not reduce the quality of service that private prisons give. It cuts the humanity inside of their facilities. We need to move people out of these facilities and move them to facilities that are operated to rehabilitate, not make profits. Has to abolish this cruelty. But second, stand with me and affirm because it's part of the push against mass incarceration. A June 2011 Justice Policy Report details a 3-pronged approach to how private prisons game the system. They lobby, they make direct campaign contributions, and they also network. Private prisons openly support increasing incarceration times and also sentencing times. They donate millions of dollars to candidates for them to switch sides on these issues, meaning that once candidates are elected into office, they're writing bills and they're passing bills that support mass incarceration. In office, politicians are even appointing private prison officials as bureaucrats. They now have a direct connection onto the legislative floors. In 2019, the American Civil Liberties Union reported that private prisons gave $10 million to political candidates and spent $25 million in lobbying in the past 3 decades alone. Their efforts have worked. At the same time frame, the number of beds in these facilities has increased by 16 times, and they filled every single one of them. Representative Nailuri wonders why we can't just stop mandatory minimums in harsh sentencing. We actually can't because of the private prison lobby. Even if we could, private prisons still remain inhumane. Representative Nailuri wants to solve corruption in the political system. She wants to solve mass incarceration and our reliance on private prisons, so she should be standing on the affirmation. There is no way to reform the commercialization of incarceration. Pass to create a safer America, one that puts humanity above all else.
Representative Bai for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Any and all questioners, please raise your placards. Representative Nailuri.
Okay, so does it take up resources to reallocate all of the private companies and private prisons that we are using right now and converting them all to government facilities?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so can you explain to me how it is more efficient doing that over just removing mandatory minimums and reducing mass incarceration rates?
Okay, so first, like in the real Congress, it is incredibly hard to do that because of the private prison lobby.
Okay,
you have to take away private prisons.
We are a Congress here. We have the power to abolish mandatory minimums right now. Why not do that?
So then if there's a bill about that, let's just go take that. But right now, the bill in front of us is about private prisons.
Okay, but the bill in front of us is wasting resources when there's a much more efficient solution at hand.
It's not wasting resources. Even if we abolish mandatory minimums, as Representative Gutierrez said in his speech, they still have quotas. They're still gonna prey off the prison system.
But how can they do that if we're getting rid of one of the major drivers of mass incarceration?
Because of quotas.
Okay, but they don't have the power.
Representative, your questioning time has elapsed. Representative Krasinski.
Hi, Mr. Bai. So one of the things you're concerned about is the filling up of these private prisons, right?
Yes.
Okay, so say that we pass his legislation. What happens to the facilities that are already in place?
So what happens is that the prisoners are still gonna remain in there. It's just that the private prison companies don't exist anymore, and the public government has control over the facility.
Okay, so what exactly can the public government do about this overcrowding? Are they going to magically build us 100 more new jails to store these new inmates?
So it's not really much as overcrowding. Overcrowding exists in both public prisons and private prisons, but private prisons are much worse for a reason. It's because they're for profit and they're cutting costs. The public government isn't gonna do that.
Our federal government doesn't cut costs when it comes to housing our inmates?
It still does that, but for-profit prisons obviously do that a ton more.
But why doesn't our government have the exact same incentive as the for public?
Because we put human lives typically more in the front than for-profit prisons do.
Thank you, Representative. Your questioning time has elapsed. Seeing as that was the speech of the affirmation, any null negation speakers, please raise your placards. Representative Krasinski.
I thank the chair. Once again, that's Representative Korsunsky, Kor as in Apple Core, Sunsky, speaking for the second time this session. If all my judges and PR are ready, then I will begin. Some things are best kept private. Social security numbers, government secrets, all of our tax returns, but most importantly, our prisons. The affirmation characterizes private prisons as greedy for money, yet failed to recognize the impacts they have on America's most marginalized. It's for this reason they're going to vote in the negation with me today. Because first, this bill will actually reduce competition and lower the incentive for federal prisons to improve. Mr. Gutierrez was incredibly concerned in his authorship about the environment that they have in private prisons and the utilities that they lack. However, a vote in the affirmation means no hope that prison services will actually ever improve. Forbes explains in December 2016 that just the threat of privatization causes improvements in public correction departments. In fact, when the governor of Kentucky floated the idea of privatization for state services, his announcement seemed to usher in an era of more responses to prisoner abuse. Privatization is necessary to create competition, not only between private companies, but also between the private and public sector. The result of competition is an improvement of the prison system for every single inmate. By eliminating private prisons, this competition vanishes. Mr. Gutierrez, in order to solve the lack of facilities you're so concerned about, your vote needs to be in the negation, because a vote in the affirmation means no competition, which means no improvement of our already inherently flawed systems. Ms. Naluri talks about how our criminal justice system needs reform, and I totally agree. If you agree, your vote's going to be in the negation. But next, let's talk about how private prisons actually curb drug use. So people who are serving for drug crimes are often still battling drug abuse and withdrawal, which means it's imperative that we actually keep drugs out of prison. Well, why does this happen more in private prisons? Well, the New York Times explains in September of 2016 that private prisons are statistically better at finding, seizing, and recording contraband than their public counterparts. Furthermore, it shows that inmates in private prisons are less likely to use drugs and less likely to be subject to or involved in sexual misconduct. It also shows that fewer inmate deaths occur in private prisons. So Mr. Gutierrez, you're so concerned about the violence, but how can we see less deaths in these private prisons? How can we see less drug use? Private prisons ultimately have stricter rules, and this means that we have stronger rules and regulations and greatly likelihood that these rules are followed with. Drug deals in prisons contribute to the violent climate that Mr. Gutierrez is so concerned about. But if you vote in the affirmation, you convert these private facilities into public ones, meaning we loosen our regulations, we loosen our abilities to seize and find these drugs, and we only perpetuate the cycle of drug abuse for these people. We need to keep our prisons safe from drugs, sexual harassment, and even death. Because prisons emphasize rehabilitation, and they want to try and have recidivism. But understand that if you want to rehabilitate our prisoners, you want them in private prisons. Because when we have less drug use, less sexual harassment in prisons, we provide them the environment they need to become functioning members of society once again. A vote in the affirmation throws away the key to an equal opportunity. Today, by negating, we keep this door unlocked.
Thank you, Representative. Of 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Any and all questioners, please raise your placards. Representative Bai.
Okay, so you just told us that private prisons rehabilitate more, but in my speech, I specifically gave you all statistics saying that the recidivism rate in private prisons is 20% higher than in public counterparts.
Okay, but I'm talking about specific offenses, specifically drug-related offenses.
Okay, so why does a specific drug-related offense if overall private prisons aren't doing their job?
Private prisons are doing their job, and without them, we won't see any bettering of any sort of prisons because we lose that competition.
Wait, but what's happening here is that private prisons still have a larger recidivism rate. So overall, they're still not doing their job to rehabilitate.
But understand that what I'm saying, I'm talking specifically about what happens within the jail and not afterwards, right? So if we have more people seizing the drugs, if we have more oversight, these issues get prevented in the long term, rather than like just really.
But it's not being prevented in the long term.
But I just proved to you that private prisons are statistically better at finding, seizing, and recording contraband. That's not my words. That's like.
Thank you, Representative, for your questioning block has now elapsed. Representative Gutierrez.
Hi, Senator. So you talk about recidivism in your speech, right? So these private prisons, what type of prisoners do they get as outlined in their contracts?
Typically, the ones that stay for longer are allocated into private prisons.
No, in reality, they get more healthier, younger prisoners who committed.
But they also get ones with longer contracts as well.
People of color, right? So how is recidivism? So you'd agree that these people, they're more likely to come out of the prisons better people, right? Since they have the chance of being changed, right?
The people that are held within private prisons, yes, because they have an easier transition in waning
how
off.
is recidivism still higher in private prisons?
So I don't quite understand what you're saying. I talked to Mr. Bai about this just 30 seconds ago. When I'm talking about specifically curbing drug use, that's what happens in private prisons.
Sure, but overall recidivism is significantly worse in private prisons compared to public ones.
But you
Even
have to
though
take
they
into
have
account,
a better subset of people who are more likely to be changed.
Mr. Gutierrez, those are your words, not mine. I'm not citing rhetoric. I'm citing credible sources.
Representative, your questioning time has elapsed. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, any and all affirmative speakers, please raise your placards. Representative Atluri.
I thank the chair. This is Representative Atluri, spelled A-T-L-U-R-I. It's A-T-L-U-R-I. I believe judges said they were good. Let me get 5 seconds to be set up. Awesome. Today, we build prisons instead of schools. We pay guards more than our young children's teachers. For far too long, private prisons have been exploiting our justice reform for their profit, our prisoners for their dollar signs. Let's finally stand for the foundation of justice and affirm. In today's debate, there's been one fundamental point of clash. Which side better allows for prisoners to reform? The answer is clear: public prisons. There's been a huge mischaracterization of the incentives of private prisons, from Representative Naluru to Representative Korzonski. The reality is, when private prisons popped up in the 1980s, these prisons were a way for companies to make money through our reform system, and the impact is still the same. When prisons are money hungry, justice reform isn't even on their priority list. Megan Munford of Brookings in October 26 explains that the social cost associated with the use of prisons is the greater incentive for lobbying in a consolidated market where private prisons increase the punitiveness of correction systems for their own benefit and at the burden of taxpayers and those incarcerated. Private prisons, as Representative Gutierrez already mentioned, increase sentences and keep people in jail through regulations like mandatory minimums and quotas. With more prisoners, they're allotted more money and profit for those contractors. Representative Naluru champions that our justice system itself is corrupt, but understand that private prisons are actually more likely to accept inmates that have higher sentences and are in better condition because they make more profit. As I said before, they lobby so they can get more of these prisoners to have longer sentences. But the problem becomes even worse. Brookings Institute in October 21st, 2016 explains that private prisons tend to hire fewer officers. Private prisons report an average of 1 officer per 6.9 inmates compared to 1 officer per 4.9 inmates in public facilities. So Representative Korzonski argues that we're limiting competition, but I'd argue in the status quo, there's already tons of competition. Yet in private prisons, we still have a lack of faculty, reform officers, wardens, medical personnel. There's been competitions for decades. Then why haven't we seen any sort of improvement? It's because they are always money driven. Even on the negative's highest ground, at the end of the day, private prisons will always be money oriented. They will trade people for profit. They will trade prisoners for dollar signs. Let's finally see private prisoners, finally see the justice and reform they're entitled to. Pass.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Any and all questioners, please raise their placards. Representative Korzonski.
Hi, Representative. So private prisons operate off of performance-based contracts, right?
Right.
Okay, so if they get funding based off how well they perform, why doesn't that spike competition?
No, because as I told you, these prisons have been around for years. They were built in 1980. We still
There's been no improvement to any of our jails since 1980.
No, there has, but it's still not on par with these public prisons. Like, it's not even close. It's every 2 person, there's not even 1 person there.
Okay, so say that that's true, right? And we allocate, all of a sudden we make these private facilities public. Do we all of a sudden have all these workers to fill in those gaps? Or are we just going to have the same
No,
issue
today's
have to be owned by
legislation-
the government?
Today's legislation is implemented in 2023. I believe we have enough time to create those prisons, get the guidelines, and make sure we have better reform system.
But that's not anywhere in this bill, right? So that's just a promise that you're making me, but you can't, the bill doesn't make that promise, right?
No, it says we're going to be building it in 2023. And
Sure, but more staff.
Your questioning time has elapsed. Representative Mallory.
Hi, Representative. So you talked a lot about private prisons in your speech. Well, what
Correct.
about public prisons? Aren't all of these public prisons outsourcing all of their services to private companies?
right, they are, but that problem ends when
And
you
aren't those private companies doing the exact same thing public prisons are doing?
No, as I read you in my evidence, private prisons specifically incentivize like police officers and the justice system to have longer mandatory minimums so they can make more money.
Okay, so
Private systems don't do that.
Wouldn't passing legislation to end mandatory minimums get rid of that?
Yeah, today's legislation isn't ending mandatory minimums. So I would like to discuss with you about that, but today's legislation isn't talking about that.
But spending all of this time and resources trying to find replacements for all of these private companies and private prisons, that can be easily solved by just one bill abolishing mandatory minimums, which is the more efficient solution.
I understand, but today's legislation isn't mandatory minimum, so.
Thank you, Representative. Your questioning time has elapsed. Seeing as there are no more speakers in this debate round, I'm going to unilaterally move to previous question, which calls for our final appeal speeches. Representative Gutierrez, you have the floor.
All right. Thank you. And hi, everyone. That's Representative Gutierrez speaking for the final time this session. PO, just let me, and judges, just let me know when you're ready. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Today, it seems like the affirmation has been left blind by the dollars. Sometimes we need to all understand, as a Congress, that cheaper is not always better. And nowhere does that phrase more apply true more than today. Let's see the main points made by the negation in today's debate, and let's see why exactly they fall flat. First, Senator Naluri says that you're not going to actually do anything in the status quo to help out people unless you get rid of mandatory minimums. But Senator Bai tells you exactly why that point's wrong. Because actually getting rid of private prisons is the first step towards removing mandatory minimums. We all agree mandatory minimums can be a bad thing, and I'd love to talk about legislation on that later. But the private prison lobby inputs a ton of money to keep mandatory minimums in place. We can end mandatory minimums later if you like, but we need to end private prison companies' stranglehold on the industry right now. That's the first step towards doing anything. Next, Senator Korsunski says you have a lesser rate of drug usage as a result of more enforcement. That's not true. It's actually because of the type of prisoner, because I told her this in cross-examination, but private prisons look for lower risk prisoners. That's the reason why they have less drug usage. But even then, here's another problem. Their recidivism is so much higher compared to public prisons. That's where I draw the line. Private prisons aren't even good at doing their job. But finally, Senator Korsunski talks about competition because you have private and public sectors. However, Senator Lurie described why exactly this is wrong. You'll have no competition because the private sector is so poor. So fundamentally, you have one option. That's the path.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Representative, for that final appeal speech of 1 minute and 34 seconds. Seeing as that was the affirmations final appeal speech, we'll now move on to the negations final appeal speech. Representative Mallory.
As the chair, that's Representative Naluri with my final appeal on the first negation. I'm assuming all judges and the presiding officer are ready. Profiting off of mass incarceration is in no doubt inhumane, but today's legislation simply wastes our resources and our time. First, I'd like to address a major misconception that the affirmation has made in all of today's debate, that private prisons are horrible and public prisons are the do-all, end-all, and they're the best things ever. Well, according to a report by the Office of Inspector General in August of 2016, on average, 72.6 complaints on the conditions of the facility were filed per month in private prisons in comparison to 121 complaints filed at public prisons. That's an increase by almost 70%. Now, Representative Gutierrez cites the same report, but all of the statistics he states are about select private prisons selected by the government to make public prisons look good. The reason these public prisons are just as bad, if not worse than private prisons, is because they outsource to all of these private companies on services such as food, healthcare, transportation, communication networks, practically everything. Public prisons are no different than private prisons. It's just public prisons say they are government owned and they do everything through third party and private companies. It's not that easy to make every prison government owned, given that practically every single prison in the United States has involvement with private companies. Keep in mind, mandatory minimums is one bill to pass. Now, Representative Bai says that private prisons will lobby against us with this mandatory minimums thing, but we are a Congress. We can ban mandatory minimums now and end this issue once and for all. Negate.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 1 minute and 32 seconds. Seeing as that was both our final appeals, we'll now move on to voting procedures. All those in favor of passing this bill here today, please raise your placards. 3. All those against? 2. Any and all abstentions? There should be none. Representative Nullery, are you? Okay. So on a vote of 3 to 2 to 0, we pass this bill here today. Before we do move on to the Leadership Award, which is going to be led by our pro temp, I just like to summarize what we did today. We got through a whole 10 speeches today in the session. We completed 18 questioning blocks. Everyone who was speaking got in 2 speeches each, which is amazing. Everyone did such a great job. Despite some road bumps here and there, we still made it through. Congratulations to everyone for finishing our prelims rounds. I give the floor to our pro temp.
Thank you to the PO. So now I'm going to run the Leadership Award. So this is for the person in today's round who you thought, I guess, in your mind was the best speaker or had the best leadership. So if you will please, this will run similar to a PO election. So please just private message me. I believe this is for the PO as well. So there, I should have Rao, Naluri, Bai, Korsunsky, Gutierrez, and Etluri.
Just a question, Mr. Pro Temp. Aren't we supposed to nominate the leaders and then vote?
I believe this is just going to function like a PO election where you just, at least in terms of the voting. So it's not going to be need a majority. It's just going to be whoever has the most votes that they get the award. And it won't be announced, by the way. It'll be announced later by Teb.
I'm sorry to bother you again, Mr. Pro Temp, but rule number 2 in our packet does say that we have nominations. After this, competitors can nominate any other competitor for this award. So it is set up in the sense that we do have elections.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's completely fine. Like, I just wasn't aware of that. So I guess if that's going to function like POs, then I guess I open the floor for Leadership Award nominations. Senator Gutierrez.
I nominate Senator or Representative Rao.
Are there any other nominations? Etzluri?
I nominate Senator Korsunsky.
Let me just get that down. And Representative Korsunsky?
I nominate Representative Naluri.
And Representative Rao?
I nominate Representative Gutierrez.
Are there any other Representative Gutierrez?
I nominate Representative Bai.
Are there any other nominations?
Motion
Please say that motion.
to close the Leadership Award nominations.
Is there a second? All in favor? Assuming unanimous consent, the floor is closed. So I guess we'll now move to voting. I think the only person you cannot vote for is Mr. Etluri. My apologies, sir. Okay, I believe I have all the votes in. Let me just double check. Yeah, okay, so there is currently a tie between Representative Rao and Representative Naluri, so we're going to do another vote. You can vote for either Rao or Naluri. Okay, we have a winner. I don't think I'm supposed to announce it now. So judges, would you like to give any final comments on this session or anything just like to conclude?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for a great round, everyone. I had a lot of laughs, even if they were more at you than with you, but I did have a lot of laughs. So thank you for letting me judge. I'll see you tomorrow in finals. I highly recommend that in finals tomorrow, you guys actually prep. Be prepared to have prep, like even sometimes we go into rounds thinking, oh, I'm going to preside this round and therefore I don't have to prep these legislations, or I'm just going to crystal and I don't have to prep. That's not the best move, because honestly, you can never guarantee what's going to happen in a round. Highly recommend that you guys have some sort of research that you can go off of just in case things don't work out, because that always happens whether you like it or not. And judges really appreciate that, because God, like 10 minutes of recess, even though it was funny, it was a little bit frustrating because we are taking our time. So it's like respecting your judge's time. I think you're lucky that I don't think either of the judges cared, but in future rounds, I'm sure that judges could get annoyed and therefore hurt you in ranking. I really appreciate all of you who did end up flipping your speeches or ended up writing a neg for that specific legislation. Thank you. Definitely take that into account. Just have fun tomorrow. If you break, I think there are actually 6 people here, so all of you are breaking, right? Most likely.
I think it's top 5, but yeah, so
okay,
most people are gonna break.
JK, sorry. Good luck if you break tomorrow. Have fun. And please, like, read the rules packet so you know Parley Pro.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess Meta pretty much like said everything that I wanted to say, but I guess just to add on, I really want to say thank you so much, y'all, for taking the time, especially within your summer vacation, to participate in an event like this. This will definitely help out with your public speaking presentation skills and your debate like career in the future, if you wish to continue to do that. And in general, y'all are really fun and entertaining to watch. And I really love how y'all are able to like utilize your prose and your public speaking so miraculously. It's so amazing to just see so many people just be able to do all that. So thank you so much for giving me a really good time and all. And I will not be seeing you tomorrow since I will not be judging, but y'all are great. And I know that you'll be doing great in the future. And just to add on, hi, William. Happy birthday.
Oh yeah, happy birthday, William.
Happy birthday, Will.
Thank you.
Also, if anyone wants any specific feedback or has any specific questions, feel free to message me on Facebook. I think all of you have me. And if you don't have me, message me on Instagram or find me on Facebook. It's fine. Or find me on LinkedIn, whatever. I don't really care.
Yeah. Same here. If you need any tips for like, you know, utilizing your prose or like spoken word, if you want any introduction stuff that you might want to use for future speeches, or if you just like want to like practice your speeches in general, or have any questions about like the future of debate or so, feel free to reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, whatever. Yeah.
Oh, one more thing.
What?
We do need a motion to adjourn.
I didn't finish, but okay.
Oh wait, no. I think we should adjourn before before we should have done all of this. Like I think.
Motion.
So,
Are there any motions?
Represented by.
Motion. Oh, I motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Assuming unanimous consent, we're adjourned. Mr. Kareem, please continue.
So yeah, if you look in the chat for Zoom, here's my like social media handles. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to and such. And I'm serious with this.
Follow me on Instagram.
Follow me on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, whatever. You know the vibes. And I love y'all. Y'all are amazing. And keep up the good work. Love y'all. Bye.
Wait,